Before the headline, before the arrest, before the body. Cycles that kill. This is the season 1 finale of Cycles That Kill. All season, we have explored maternal failure as an open door, what it lets in, what it produces, and what it costs the people around it. Today, I'm closing the season with a conversation with someone who has spent decades working with the children and families that cycles shape. He has watched generational patterns replicate in real time, and he's dedicated his career to interrupting them. Joe, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you. My name is Joe Wilson, and I'm currently the Senior Director of Mental Health Services for a local nonprofit agency here in Montgomery County, Maryland. Happy to be with you.
Awesome. Tell us a little more about your credentials as well, just so that, everyone has the context that I do.
Sure. I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Maryland. I'm a family therapist by training. I got my degree from Catholic University in, 1995, so I'll sound a little old there. But that was following a career about 15 years as an elementary educator and sort of made the leap from education into social work, which was a really natural kind of evolution in some ways. I spent my educational career working in a Title I school with a very diverse population, with lots of families with needs, and so social work felt like a natural sort of stepping stone there.
Yeah, it's not honestly social work. The reason I love it is because it's not a huge jump from anything, really. Like you could be anything as a social worker and you can kind of come from any field and like get right to it and feel right at home.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah. And I think there was just a natural connection. All this back in those days when I was a teacher, they were experimenting with what is now the norm, which is integrating services in schools and really working to help support families, recognizing that services really go beyond the classroom and need to if you're going to close the achievement gap or if you're going to make sure students can achieve fully. So it was a really a great opportunity. And I think I was probably the only educator that was licensed as a mental health professional once I graduated because I stayed into the school system for about another 8 years after that. So it brought an interesting flavor to the work.
Wow, that sounds really cool. I mean, so as you all can hear, he spent decades working with families, a lot of times in crisis. So, Joe, my first question for you is when you look at a child who's struggling, what's the first question you ask about their family and maybe even their mom?
It's a great question. I had wonderful training as a social worker in a community mental health agency. And the very first thing we learned about in those days was really to talk about the culture of the family, not just the ethnic and the sort of cultural heritage of a family, but really what is the culture of the family? What roles do parents play in the family system? And really taking a systems approach. And so the first questions we often asked were, asking to hear the story of the family, how the family came to be where they are in the moment we're engaging them, right? So, hearing about uh, either one or both parents, what their history was and how they found each other, how they created the family. Was it intentional? Was it not? How they made decisions as a family, and certainly in my work in the communities that I've been in, I was pretty much working with single parent families or families where parents were living separately. There were two households, and so it was oftentimes a kind of a dual process to really understand where each parent came from in terms of their own history and how that might have informed the culture of the family that we were looking at the child within. And so it was helpful to really take inventory there and really take a systems approach to understanding how that individual child was experiencing life in their family.
Yeah, and that's so interesting you say that. I am from a single parent household and, now I'm not like I'm married and my kids are, you know, have two parents in the house and it's such a drastic difference, and
Mhm.
I wouldn't have ever known until now that I'm kind of living it as the parent, not as the child, but then there are parts of
Right,
me that are still kind of being healed in real time as I watch my children experience something that I didn't. And it
right,
really reminds me of something that you talked about when we first spoke that when you were doing community work, you noticed the pattern of daughters getting pregnant around the same age that their moms got pregnant. And, I thought about that after I talked to you. And in my own life, my mom got pregnant with me when she was like 25, which was pretty old, for like that
right,
age, like back
right.
back then. And I didn't have my first child until 32, which, now
Mm,
we're in a society where people are kind of waiting like a significantly long time, if even
right.
having children. So, this season we examined a case where a mom's emotional unavailability produced a daughter who actually faked a pregnancy for 10 months and then killed her friend to steal her unborn baby. So that
Mhm.
is super loaded, has nothing to do with my background. That did
Right.
not happen in my life. But I'm wondering, what does your experience tell you about the specific ways that a mom's relationship to her own body and just her own story can get transmitted to her daughter?
Yeah, really interesting. And I'll just say it wasn't just daughters, it was sons as well, which we
Mm,
found really fascinating that the sons became teenage parents at the same age that their parent did, that they were living with. In this case, it was the mom. So really fascinating. And I think, in the examples that we saw, for those families, frankly, that did not address the challenges and concerns that go along with teen pregnancy and what it was like to be a teenage mother, what we found was the families where the mom really didn't talk about the experience in any meaningful way were the families where these kids were really much more casual around their engagement with their peers and what it meant to have a child. And it was interesting because we would sort of counterintuitive to it what we would thought because we thought would, oh wait, you see what difficulty there is and how difficult life can be when you have a parent that's unprepared, right, for being a parent, and that did not transmit. It seemed what did transmit, it seems, was this sense of this was kind of normal. This was sort of,
mm,
oh, this is what's expected. And yes, in some cases, the teenage daughter felt like that elevated her to parental status, right? So I'm having a baby. Now I'm an adult in this family. And that we saw oftentimes that was a way for the teenage daughter to sort of emerge in the or come from the adolescent experience into the adult experience, even as there was a lot of acknowledgement that they weren't ready for it, but that it
mhm.
was something that they had to endure, almost like a rite of passage. And so we framed it very much in kind of understanding it through the family culture and these moments of transition or these moments of sort of what I would say is sort of rites of passage or these sort of like I can be an adult now because I am having the same experience my mother had, which I thought was really interesting. It was also the same for the boys, where they felt like, okay, I'm an adult now, I'm a man now, I have to step up, I have to have a job, or I have to provide, or I have to, there wasn't this sense of, hey, I'm not ready for this. Can we talk about what's really happening in terms of the way the world might perceive it? So it was really really interesting there.
Yeah, that is interesting. Like using childbirth to assert yourself, and move
Hmm.
into a new, kind of chapter of your life. And back then things were just so different because
Hmm.
I know for me, the reason why I delayed my, having children, and then as I hear just my peers talk about why they're delaying, it's for the reason that some of the children back in the day decided to have children. It's like, well, mom, you didn't quite know what you were doing, so I'm gonna figure
Right.
out what I want to do and how I want to navigate this before I even bring anyone into the world. So it's just
Hmm.
interesting how some of the same dynamics are still occurring, but the way that we're processing them is different. And I think that that shows a lot of how society and systems kind of play into how people
Absolutely.
understand where they are and what's going on in their life. Because I know back then the rhetoric that is around now about, setting boundaries and like breaking generational curses, like that wasn't a thing back then. And even if it was, there
Right.
was no action steps behind it. Like it was something that
Hmm.
was just said, but no one knew how to actually do it. So things just were kind of replicated.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And where we so in the community where I worked, there were families where this didn't happen, and where it seemed to not happen was where there was this conversation about what I call sort of reality, a realistic or reality perspective took place where the teen was able to have a conversation with their parent in a way that I think most parents would say, when they have a healthy ego and a sense of self, to say, yeah, this was a mistake. Don't do what I did. I
Mm,
want you to have better. I want you to be different. I want you to, when there was open conversation there, you saw the teens sort of really thinking more carefully, particularly the young boys. There were three young boys that did not have that. So I worked with about, I would say, 2 dozen families, and there were three boys that had that experience of watching their moms manage, them and their siblings and really struggle. And had the ability to observe and say, yeah, this is not, this is not a good situation. Even as they could find a way to hold their parent in regard and hold their parent like, I love my mother, but I don't want to be my mother. I don't want to do this.
yeah.
And there was a way to have some distance there that I think was really healthy.
I agree with you. And, with vulnerability, like it's scary and it's hard. And, I think admitting that you don't know what you're doing is t like the thought of telling a 4-year-old that, or, however
Right.
old I have two daughters that are 4, and I also have a son who's 1.5. And I'm like, y'all, I have no idea, sometimes.
Right.
But my mom would have never said that because it's like
Right.
this strong Black woman. You got to know everything, or at least pretend like you do. So
Right.
I love to hear that, even in a culture, like a societal culture where the norm was to just kind of grit and bear it, that there were these pockets of people that were deciding that they didn't want to do that. And that is how change started to enter the family, it sounds.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
It makes me think of another case that we talked about this season, and it was the Oxford High School shooting, which happened,
Mhm.
several years ago. But the mom sat in a school meeting the morning that her son opened fire on his classmates, and the counselor was just telling her about all the drawings that he had. And there was a drawing that he did that morning, and he wrote on it, "The thoughts won't stop, help me, blood everywhere." And he
Mhm.
also was reaching out to his parents, telling them that he was seeing demons and just hearing these voices and actually asking them explicitly for help. And they were laughing at him, telling him he needed to shake it off and giving him melatonin to be able to go to sleep instead of addressing, why he might have been having the sleep issues. And
Mhm.
in that meeting, the mom never said anything about a gun that she'd actually gifted him shortly before that meeting even occurred. And she
Mhm.
refused to intervene. She told the school counselor that she had to get back to work. And then shortly after that, she gets an alert to her phone to let her know that there's a shooter on campus. And she immediately texts her son to say, don't do it. So it's like in that moment, it's your child, but that's in retrospect. Like it's too late.
Mhm.
People are
That's
dead
right.
now. And
That's
I'm
right.
I'm just wondering, like, because you just talked about parents having open communication, but when you encounter a parent who's received the level of signal from a child that, this parent received and they haven't acted on
Right.
it, what do you typically find underneath it? Like, what is the parent managing that makes not seeing their child feel safer than actually seeing them?
That's a great question. And I think it goes right back to your point about vulnerability. I think saw in our work, and it was really important as we worked with the families. We worked for about 10 years in this community, and it took a long time for us to figure this out. But what we saw underneath of that was an unwillingness for the parent to really understand themselves in a
Hmm.
way that they could support and help and connect with their child. So in that, what you're talking about there to me reads as a disconnection. Like there's really very little connection between that parent and that child. And what seems underneath that is that their inability to be vulnerable, as you were saying earlier, around can I connect with my child and understand who my child is and how they are without somehow feeling bad about myself, without
Hmm.
somehow thinking that I'm either failing or people are judging me. And so what we found certainly in the community and what we hope to sort of promote through our program was we developed a program called the Family Journey. And it was really to do, and this is before the Strengthening Families program, which is now an evidence-based program that takes a similar approach. What we found is having groups of kids and parents meet separately and together in what we consider a fairly intense approach to give the opportunity for parents to create their own safe community to talk about themselves
Hmm.
in relation to their children so that they could be more open to connecting with their child. But I think what you described there is very much a parent who was not connected to her child, who even though you took the like there should have been serious concern that she would have heard based on what the people were telling her. She demonstrated a real, I think, a lack of connection, and the reason for that what we found is it's protective, it's self-protective. Like I can't hear that my student is in any way in danger or in any way because I don't know what I would do about that, and I can't admit that. It's those families that oftentimes require, unfortunately, the system and the power of a court and the power of child protective services coming in and taking their child because they just can't see it. And they refuse to connect with the child in a way that puts them in that caregiver role. Right. So I think that's exactly what you described there is that parent was just not connected to their child.
Yeah, and I what I hear you saying too is that they're also not connected to themselves. Like there are
Right.
parts of themselves that they don't want to see. And it
Hmm.
makes me think, and I didn't intend on being this deep about myself on here, but it happens like because I'm just an open book. So it makes me think about when my mom found out and when I was in high school that I got raped. And she also had been raped, like
Hmm.
she had a long history of sexual violence, against
Hmm.
her. And her first thing that she said was like, "Oh, you're lying. You like to make your life seem
Hmm.
more glamorous than it
Right.
actually is." And of course, in the moment that hurt, I'm a teenager. I have no idea what the heck this is coming from. But like now,
Hmm.
as an adult who also is a mental health professional, I know that she couldn't stand to accept, like, what does that mean about me if my child had the same thing happen to them that
Hmm.
happened to me? Because I know my mom was X, Y, or Z, however I would describe her. So does that mean that I'm the exact same as my mom?
Right.
So instead of
Right.
actually being able to attend to me, she would rather push it off because, like you hinted at, she can't face the characteristics about herself.
Exactly right. And I think that's exactly the thing that was in another case you examined this season, right? With the lesbian mother who had this
Hmm.
son who had such internalized homophobia. And again, I think not being able to connect with your parts of yourself, and I think you're referencing it even as you talk so well about your experience as a parent. Parenting your child is revisiting yourself parented, right? And
Yeah.
so having being able to access that and feel comfortable, have that ego strength is really important. I would suggest to you that that mother who was a lesbian did not was not able to transmit to her child like, hey, there's some self pride you can take in being you, in being
Hmm.
able to be open to the world and accept yourself and have and expect the world to accept you. I'd be so curious to know more about the mother's experience in how she was accepted or not, and what she had to do in order to feel comfortable living what was her own truth, but how that didn't transmit to her son. Because I think there was um, perhaps some of the similar kinds of things you're suggesting that happened to them, that happened, that happened to this family in terms of just not being able to connect with yourself enough to relate to your child or connect with your child. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, and for those listening, because someone could stumble upon this episode and not have watched that one. So, this case that he's talking about is where a mother raised a son whose shame around his own same-sex desire. And by the way, the mom was a lesbian. The same-sex desire, his shame was so severe that he committed triple homicide to eliminate
Hmm.
witnesses to a same-sex sexual act. So, he pretty much
Right.
went back to the scene of where he had, experienced pleasure in a same-sex situation and killed everybody that he could.
Wow.
So in that specific scenario, I think you're absolutely right. Like he had to experience such severe shame that he hadn't been taught how to deal with, or even maybe never even told that his mom also had experienced the same sort of shame too. So I think
Mhm.
you're absolutely right that like as parents, even when we haven't figured things out, we at least owe the story to be told.
Right. That's a great way of putting it. I completely agree.
Yeah, that it's all
And to
so
your
interesting.
Sorry, and to your point, that was the point of the family journey curriculum that we developed. We based it a lot on Ken Oldfield's work on rites of passage and rituals and the importance of rituals in even as rooted in culture and ethnicity, but really rooted in the culture of the family and recognizing that stories need to be told, that there are wise elders. And we encouraged parents to take on that role of being a wise elder, right? And being able to take their story and their experience and their history and get so comfortable with it that they could in fact use it to connect with their kids. And it was an intense. So a family would meet. We'd meet with the parent group one night. We'd have all the siblings in different age groups for the second night, and then a third night during the course of the week would be everybody together in a multifamily group. It was a pretty intense approach, but and of course it required a lot of let's feed you dinner, let's have pizza, and let's have but it was really important that we gave families the opportunity to, as individuals, understand themselves and what they bring to the family so that they could feel comfortable being vulnerable and connecting with the other members of the family. At the same time, hopefully uh, holding boundaries and holding roles and so forth in a way that was healthy for the family and for the children.
Yeah, you bring up so many good points. I mean, first of all, that sounds like a very powerful program. One of the things I love to say is that good intentions are no match for generational curses. Like you can't just hope your way out of,
Right.
family trauma. And
That's
it
right.
sounds like you were giving families like step by step as to how they can recover, from, I'm sure, not just something that they were dealing with, but like everybody before them was also dealing with. So I love that you were a part of that. And it sounds like you also created it. Am I right about that
We
part?
did at the time. I was working with wonderful clinicians at our agency, and we sort of said, "Hey, we've got to really like." We've been working with the kids, I think, for several years, and this wonderful clinician, she was a good deal older than I was, said, I think in order to be effective, you're going to have to get the parents involved." And we created a three module curriculum around sort of first of all like self, and then self in relation to your role in the family, and then thirdly was communication and interaction with family members. And so we did this three sort of module curriculum. Each one had like 8 sessions to it, and we created the curriculum. We used all the materials we had to sort of foster group dialogue and conversation, and we ran the program for about 3 years and found major changes took place for families, and they were really so grateful. Parents were so grateful because I think what we also forget in community mental health is you can't just work with the child. You just
Mhm.
can't. If you really want to see, to your point, change for the child, change intergenerationally, you really must work with the family. And the truth is, I tell students all the time that intern at my agency who say, "Oh, I'm going to be an individual therapist." I tell them all the time, "Are you nuts? You everybody who walks into your office brings with them their family." Like, and I think that's what's wonderful about your work is it just the examination of really how families shape us. When you're building on Virginia Satir's wonderful work, that
Mhm.
families are the first experience we get to know who we really are. Like it's really important to understand the influence of family. So you can't work with just children. And so this wonderful clinician said to me, we've got to work with the parents. And so we would sit up, we'd on the weekends, we'd get together, we'd figure out our curriculum, and then we'd implement it during the week. And it was just wonderful. And in fact, one of the things we did was there was an incentive for families to participate was that we'd do a drawing at the end of our 3 modules and a family would get a vacation
Oh,
together. And they
wow.
did.
Okay.
And we gave them a vacation to Disney World, and they went to Disney World and had a wonderful time. And it was and to this day, the kid that was in the family who I still hear from now and again remembers that as their one of the best times he had with his family was being on this vacation, and not because of where they were or what they did, but because they were really able to connect and relate to one another. So, just really wonderful. So I think working with families is the answer, and it has to be. Unfortunately, the way we silo our resources and our approaches, finding agencies and finding partners that can do that work is just really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, and we're also in such an individualistic society now, and I'm not
Yes,
saying that
yes.
you shouldn't estrange from toxic people. I am one person who absolutely believes it, but I think so many of us are like cutting our families off and then thinking that no contact means no residue. Like you can just end the
Right.
relationship and it's all over. And
That's
then we're
right.
also not doing the best at like building the future family. We're still kind
That's
of
right. That's
replaying all
right.
the stuff. So I agree, though, that family work is so powerful. Even if you can't get the people in the room, you're going to have to acknowledge what they did, what they experienced that made them do that, through genograms and, other types of work that kind of hones in on how everybody got the way that they are. I think that that
That's
still
right.
has to happen. We can't just isolate behavior to just one person.
Right. No, that's right. That's right.
But
Yeah,
you as you were talking to about just kind of encouraging parents to open up more, it made me think about how there's a myth in so many families that, if I don't want my child to go through this thing, I shouldn't tell them about it. And I know that that that's totally not true. Hiding the story
right.
won't actually change the impact of the story.
That's
So I
right.
love that your work pushed parents to acknowledge no matter how painful, what they went through and package it in a way that it still made them feel like they were, the mom or the dad in the household, but also allowed them to let their child in on a little bit of that because there's wisdom in the midst of it, even if you feel like you don't know what you're doing or, there's still something that in there because you went through it.
Exactly right. I think, I'll keep borrowing from Virginia Satir, who was just terrific on this. And she said, she said at one point, my dream is to make families a place where adults with high self-esteem can develop. Like that's what
Mhm.
you need, right? You need the parents to really feel good about themselves, connected, as you said, to yourself, to really be able to share those stories and to share their wisdom in a way that affects the child. Positively, that really supports development rather than undermines development. And so many of the maladaptive coping skills that parents have with low self-esteem really impede healthy child development. And it's just,
Mhm.
I think your podcast does a wonderful job of showing like, hey, here are all those little things that a school teacher might ignore, or the principal doesn't have time to address, or the school counselor might note and offer a brochure for referral. But that does not help the parent or the family and ultimately the child to develop better differently. You have like all those small things. Those are small things until they're big things, right?
Mhm.
And I think your podcast does a great job of like, here are the big things, folks. Like this is this is what happens if we
Yeah.
don't address these things and take the time to do it in a way that works for families. So I think that's exactly the challenge that we face.
Yeah, because I mean, most families are obviously never gonna make it to the point of being on my podcast, right?
Right,
But at
right,
the same time, you never know. Like,
right. That's right.
I love at the end of every episode, I hold up a mirror and I'm basically showing people that, like, okay, maybe you're not this person who committed this triple homicide, but also these are like the small commonplace manifestations of that
Right.
maybe you've pushed under the rug and ignored. And
That's
I
right.
love to get feedback from people because I've been told it's like a true crime buffet. And and
Right.
then I've also been told too, and this was one of my favorite pieces of feedback, was that, someone was listening to one of the episodes and they're like, oh my God, I'm this person. But, obviously they haven't killed anyone, but they're like, I am not too far from
Right.
being right where they are. So I truly do love this work. And
Mhm.
you've talked about so many of the amazing interventions that you've been able to be a part of, but obviously we know that every system program does not do that. So I'm wondering,
Right.
where do you see the system most commonly fail children after their home has already failed them?
Yeah, I think it's so much that we don't. Well, when they come into the system and really struggling, and the family's already failed, we write off the family. Like
Hmm.
we say, okay, well, let's try to fix you, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, absence doesn't change the fact that there's still you carry it with you, right? The residue is there. So I think it's a complete mistake, and maybe this is me as a family therapist and train, that I was trained as a family therapist. Complete mistake to forget, ignore, and not attend to where you came from. Like, let's talk about your family. What are those relationships like? How do we help you repair? How do we help you engage your family in a way that's helpful to you? And I think for kids, that's in many ways that's all they want to do. Whether they recreate that experience with other people, with family of choice, whether it's they keep trying to get what they need from their parents and they don't get it, sometimes with disastrous consequences. In any case, it's important to recognize the relevance and the value of family, and
Yeah.
that we all need and want that connection, right? And I think services just don't. I mean, there's certainly services out there. We've got evidence-based practice, brief strategic family therapy. We've got, therapeutic foster care. We become, I think, to some degree aware of, yeah, we need to work on how the family operates and how we support the development of family, but it's not enough. at all. And I think it's really so. The summer camp that I run currently, we serve 90 kids, and we make sure we know we have 61 caregivers. We're in touch with those 61 caregivers and reaching out to them as much as we are, giving those kids their daily swim time and their arts and crafts and team games. We're reaching out to those families. What do you need? Camp's going to end soon. How can we make sure that your family is okay? What is it that that you need to take away from this experience, right? We offer a parent support group. We try to help them connect and build a community. If families experiencing homelessness or unhoused conditions or food insecurity, we are trying to do our best to lift up a parent and say, here are the resources, and we know you want to do well by your kids and your family. How do we help you do that? That's the key to giving them that high self-esteem, is no judgment and saying, you're in a tough circumstance, let us help you, right? That's what we need to do more of. And I think that's what's been most challenging for human service delivery systems, is to take that approach, because there's too much judgment and too much, fear when engaging the system in terms of what it means for the family.
And then, even because I work with adult women, so in most of my work after I specialized, I pretty much just focused on adult women, and it was individual therapy, and I would do individual coaching and things like that. And, everyone would pretty much come to me with some rendition of the same phrase of just wanting to move forward. Like, my family hurt me, my mom, did this, that, and the third. How do I move forward and create this life, these relationships, these friendships that I want? And I'm like, you can't
Right.
move forward without moving backward. So I think even when we're not in a position where, we can bring the family in and support, because maybe their experience with their family is over because they are gone, or, they're no contact or something, we still do have an obligation to look
Right.
backward. And, I
Right.
think that's what you're hinting at, is like, you cannot just erase your family. Like,
That's right.
it's a part of you, and it's a part that you have to acknowledge.
That's right.
So I
Yeah,
love
that's
that you're
right.
saying that.
No, that's right. And I've never worked with a kid in my career, whether as a teacher or a social worker, private provider, program director, who's ever wanted to leave their family behind.
Hmm.
They just don't, and obviously for good reason, right? I mean, thank God kids are so resilient, right? It takes a lot of hard experiences and narcissistic, malevolent intention to
Hmm.
really overcome the resilience of a child. Which is what, to your point, like that, not every family's on your podcast, right? But there are those outliers, right? There are those, that on the bell curve there. It's the um, extreme right or extreme left where you'll see the impact of that.
Yeah, it's so unique what you've done. And I have always struggled, and I assume that you're probably the same with like solution focused interventions, because I'm like, no, I want to go deeper. Like,
Right, right.
we can't just fix the problem without, like you said, dissecting the family. So I'm always grateful when I talk to someone, another clinician who also feels that same way, because I think that we're kind of dying out a little bit. Like, there's a
Yeah.
segment of us that are that way, but there's also a segment that just kind of thinks that, individual is the way to go. So,
Yes, no, no. And well, and let me add to that, right? Individual in the office is the way to go. I'm a big proponent of community mental health. You've got to be in the community. That's what else is, I think, is so great about social work, is that it's person and environment, right? And understanding the interaction of the person in their environment and being joining them in their environment to
mhm,
make the most effective use of that environment, and how you engage change and how you promote change. That's really, if you that's the trick, I think, is being able to engage them in their space, in this case their family space, and really understand where they're coming from and how you can promote change from within, right? And it's about harnessing the power of the family and the strength of the family that really helps make the change. And that takes time, and it takes investment, right? Typically much longer term investment than, say, once a week therapy, in the office. When I was doing my work in the community, we had a team of people. I was so fortunate to have great professionals that saw the world as I did, and we just went into this community and basically created opportunities to really engage these families and these kids where they live, literally. And that to me, I thought made a huge difference. That we were connected to their school, we were connected to their family, we were connected to their community. We were there till 10 o'clock at night some nights, right? But that's, and people say, oh, that's, how could you do that? But that's the work that's required is you're
Mhm.
there when they're on the street corner and they're chatting, and or you can knock on a parent's door because they just get home from work doing a late night shift or whatever, and you can have a conversation. That's what's really important.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I think that I mean, it sounds like you're doing great work. So it gives
Uh,
me hope that, the future of not just social work, but just mental health in general is it's bright still.
I
Because
hope so.
sometimes
I hope so.
it doesn't always feel that way when you're on Instagram watching these talking head videos. So,
That is true. I'm not on Instagram. That's true.
but you at least know what I'm talking about, it
I
sounds.
do. I do. I know what you're talking about. Because because the kids will come in and say, "Oh, I saw this on Instagram, but it didn't make sense to me." I'm like, "Yeah, it wouldn't make sense to you. You need to. There's relevance to context, and there's relevance to the work you're doing relative to the family and where you are. Some guy on Instagram isn't necessarily going to help you figure your life out, right?
Yeah, and they don't have enough time to even,
That's right.
dive deep into things, which
That's
is,
right.
why I like longer form types of content
Absolutely.
anyway. So,
Absolutely.
but yeah, no, it's been a great conversation with you. I mean, it sounds
Great. Thank
like
you.
what you're saying is several things actually. So you tell me if there's anything you want to add, but what I hear is like parents be courageous about telling your story to your children. It may be a
Mhm.
story that's full of shame and disappointment and hurt, but it's really the anchor point as to how change is even created. So I hear that. I also hear, for mental health professionals, I think there was a message in there to be willing to do the intense work that it takes to help families, like really help them. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
we want to get off, obviously we want to be able to clock out at some point but
Mhm.
also think about who you want to serve and what's required for you to serve them. That's
Absolutely.
something that I hear you saying as well. Would there be anything else that you would add and like tell us who
Oh,
the audience is and what the message is if you have
no, I think you've covered it. I think you're exactly right. I say to my student interns all the time, families don't fail, plans fail. Like a
Mm.
family isn't going to fail. You just have to figure out the plan, the treatment plan, the plan for intervention that's going to work for them, right? And so if there's something not working, it's the plan, it's not the family. And you've just got to go back and keep understanding, how to work with that family, how to engage with them, and how to understand their dynamics so that you can be a part of that in a way that you can introduce change and encourage them to pick that up and engage that.
Yeah, that makes me think of narrative work, where the
Yes.
problem is
Yes.
externalized. So I really resonate with that. That's one of my favorite modalities, actually.
Oh, that's great.
hmm
Yeah.
So
Well, great to talk with you today. Oh, yeah.
before I let you go, so I want to know where people can find you or the work that you're doing, and if they want to learn more about you or even get some support.
Oh, sure. Well, they can certainly access me at my day job at JESSA, www.jessa.org. Click on mental health services. We have a whole list of services and community mental health initiatives that we're driving there here in Maryland.
And
They
that's
can certainly
JSSA, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
JSSA. They can also reach me, personally. I think I have a website somewhere. I'm not quite sure the
You
web
think.
address. I think I do. For my practice, I'm always happy to talk with folks and refer them to services or help them myself if they'd like. They can just Google my name, Joseph Wilson, in Maryland. And yeah, no, I'd be happy to talk with anyone who might require some consultation or some help.
Okay, perfect. And I'll definitely put some links in, the description boxes on all the different distribution platforms, just so
Wonderful.
that people can reach out if they would like to. But I think
Great.
this has been an amazing conversation. I love talking about, true crime and just kind of analyzing the history behind the actual act. But also, like, I would be remiss as a social worker if I didn't have a conversation that helped people
Right.
understand what are the actions to prevent, these types of tragedies from
Right.
happening. And I think that you've been the perfect guest to help do that with me.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed talking with you and thrilled to know of your podcast and to listen to more. It's been really fascinating.
New episodes of Cycles That Kill drop every week. If this episode hit you somewhere real, share it, leave a review on Apple, and come back next week. I'm Dr. Dylesia. This is Cycles That Kill. See you next time.